and welcome back to my channel and welcome back to my albums by decade series. Today I'm doing obviously the 1980s. For the 1970s I did it in two parts, so I did 20 albums because there is so much great music from the 70s, and I got to talk about a lot of prog rock, which was nice, but music really shifted and changed in the 80s. So my 80s picks are pretty different to my 70s picks, but it's the first time that I get to talk about my all-time favourite band in this series. So yeah, I think I'll start with that album actually, just to get us rolling. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know what I'm gonna say. This album came out right at the end of the decade, 1989, and it is of course Pretty Hate Machine by 9 Inch Nails. Obviously we know 9 Inch Nails are my favourite band of all time, and this was their, well, Trent's debut album. And obviously he did this one all by himself, which is just insane because it was such a groundbreaking album. Every song on Pretty Hate Machine is great, but my top three are Sin, Terrible Lie and Head Like a Hole. Head Like a Hole is just an unbelievable song. It's so relevant now, even though we're in 2021, and it's just quite literally one of the catchiest songs I've ever heard. I just really can't say enough good things about this album. Obviously I'm biased, but I think it often gets left out of conversations about albums in the 80s. Maybe because it came out towards the end of the decade, but this isn't even in my top 10 9 Inch Nails albums, and it is still just an unbelievable record. I won't go on about it too much. If you want to hear my thoughts in more detail, then just go and watch any other of my videos about 9 Inch Nails. I've got quite a few, and I'll talk about Pretty Hate Machine in more detail in some of those, but yeah, I just think it's an amazing album. So for my second pick, we're gonna go right back to the start of the decade and talk about Peter Gabriel 3 Melt. Obviously we all know I'm a huge fan of Peter Gabriel's Genesis, and this is my favourite of the solo albums that he released. It's really like inventive and upbeat and groovy, but the lyrics are actually quite dark and political, which is something I like. It doesn't really sound like Genesis, but there are a lot of prog elements like vocal effects, sound effects, all that kind of thing. And it does feel like this album tells a story when you listen to it from start to finish. Some of my favourite songs from the album are the opening track, Intruder, which has got Phil Collins' really like ominous drumming. It just adds so much to the song, especially a song about a stalker. And I love probably the most well-known song on the album, which is Games Without Frontiers. I love Kate Bush's voice in that, and the chorus is just so catchy. So yeah, just another great one, and I really love the album cover as well. I don't know why. So my third pick is from an artist that I spoke about in my 60s video, Van Morrison, and this is my absolute favourite of all time Van Morrison album, and it is Common One. I spoke about Astral Weeks in my 60s video, which I love, but Common One has just always been my favourite Van Morrison album. The first minute of the first song on this album could like honestly bring me to tears. My mom is a huge Van Morrison fan, and this is one of her favourite albums by him, and she listens to it quite a lot, so it has a lot of good memories attached for me, and it just always reminds me of my mom, which is nice. And I just think that Van has one of those voices that just like has the power to move you when you listen to it. It's so distinctive and so unique and just beautiful, and this album for me has some of the best Van Morrison songs ever. The songs are pretty long actually. Summertime in England is like 15 minutes, and then When Heart Is Open is like 15 minutes as well. But it doesn't feel like it at all. It's one of those that when you listen to it, like 15 minutes can just go by in a flash and you don't even realise that time's gone by. And this album is just a complete joy for the ears. It's one of those that can just put you in such a good mood when you hear it. My favourite song is Summertime in England because the vocals are just great and the music is stunning, and I just love listening to it like in the car with the windows down, and all the like jazz elements and the saxophone and all the different tempo changes throughout the song. Why? It just is. Sorry, I just had to do that. Anyway, this album is amazing. So next up is an album that has a lot of good memories for me as well, and this one really reminds me of my childhood. It is Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. I absolutely love Tears for Fears. I could have put Seeds of Love on this list as well, but I think I just slightly prefer Songs from the Big Chair. Though I do love Seeds of Love as well. They are both like really kind of pivotal and important albums for me, because Tears for Fears were one of the first bands that I kind of discovered like for myself when I was younger. Like my parents didn't show them to me. I think my parents do like Tears for Fears, but they're not something that I like particularly remember hearing around the house when I was growing up and stuff. Not like Pink Floyd, the Beatles, that kind of thing. So in my mind, like little 12 or 13-year-old me had kind of discovered them by myself, I guess. And up until that point, my music taste was very much inherited from my parents. But yeah, anyway, Everybody Wants to Rule the World is just one of my favourite songs of all time. I don't know how you can't love that song, really. It's just so like uplifting. And Shout, obviously a classic. I love the song Mother's Talk as well. I mean, this is a no skip album. Like, there isn't one bad song on this album. They're all just top tier, so it just had to be on this list, really. So my fifth pick is gonna be The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking by Roger Waters. This isn't my favourite Roger Waters solo album, but it is still a bloody good album, and definitely one of the best albums from the 80s for me. I feel like Roger is one of the best songwriters ever when it comes to storytelling, and he is just like the king of concept albums in my opinion, and the king of returning themes and melodies in his albums and songs. And The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking is no different. It tells a story of like a man's dreams basically, and in these dreams the man cheats on his wife with a hitchhiker, and I feel like you do have to listen to it a good few times to understand the story. I still don't know if I 100% get it, but I think it's just a really great album. I know not everybody's a fan of Roger's solo work or this album in particular, and most people consider his best work to be Amused to Death, which I probably would agree with, but I still think this is a solid album. Eric Clapton's guitar work on the song Sexual Revolution is just sublime, and the piano on the song The Remains of Our Love is great as well. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is mine. Next up is an album from one of the most notable and important bands of the 80s, The Smiths. And my favourite album from them has got to be Meat is Murder. I'm not sure if that's an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people talk about The Queen is Dead being the Smiths' best album, but for me, I've just always loved Meat is Murder. It's got some of my favourite Smiths songs on it. I love the opening track, The Headmaster Ritual, I Want the One I Can't Have, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. It's just got so many great songs, and I think it's got some of Morrissey's best songwriting. It is, of course, very political. Morrissey talks about some hard-hitting subjects, which I love because I'm always a fan of that kind of stuff. And the closing track and the title track, Meat is Murder, is a very haunting one. But yeah, every song on this album is great in my opinion. It's got that thing where the lyrics are quite dark and political and sinister, but then the music is really kind of upbeat and like dancey, and has all these funky bass lines that just make you want to dance. Yeah, I just love like the juxtaposition of that, and I just love this album a lot. So my seventh pick is going to be Scary Monsters by David Bowie. This is definitely one of my favourite Bowie albums. It's got some really amazing tracks on it. My top 3 tracks would have to be the title track, Scary Monsters, Scream Like a Baby, and of course, the absolutely fantastic Teenage Wildlife. I just think this is a really coherent album. All the songs flow really nicely into each other, and I love the vocals, all the different like vocal techniques, the screaming, like everything like that, and it just works so well, especially in the opening track, It's No Game Part 1. And I think this album is like the perfect mix between like kind of poppy, catchy and accessible songs, but also like challenging and kind of eccentric, and that is like one of the main reasons why I love it so much. So yeah, another great one. For my 8th choice, I've gone with Moving Pictures by Rush. Obviously one of the classic Rush albums, and one that everybody talks about, and one that I absolutely love as well. I just think this is a great album. It took me a while to get into Rush. I didn't like them at first, but they're one of my dad's favourite bands, so I kind of was determined to get into them. And this album, along with my personal favourite Rush album, Hemispheres, were the ones that kind of made me love Rush. But yeah, this album opens with a bang. The opening track, Tom Sawyer, is a great one, and then the next track, Red Barchetta, really just keeps the momentum going. I love how layered and complex some of the songs are. Like when you listen with earphones, you can just hear all the different things that are going on, and I really love that. And obviously there are some fantastic bass lines from Geddy Lee, especially in the instrumental track YYZ. I don't know how you say that, like YYZ or whatever, and that is probably my favourite from from the album. I love Rush instrumental tracks, they're always so good. And then you've got the longest song on the album, which is The Camera Eye, which is a great one and just really shows off like how talented these three musicians are. And overall, I just think it's a really solid album with some amazing standalone songs. Next up is The First Lady to feature on this list. And this is an album I haven't been listening to for that long, so it's a fairly new one for me. But it is Hounds of Love by Kate Bush. This was love at first listen for me. The opening track is just stunning. And I love how unique it is. There are like so many different emotions that are explored on this album and so many different emotions it takes you through as you listen to it from start to finish. It's like ethereal and romantic and wistful, but then kind of like aggressive and then heartbreaking at times as well. My top 3 songs are probably the opening track, Running Up That Hill, Dream of Sheep. Actually, the whole of side 2 is just gorgeous to me. It's basically one continuous piece, even though the songs do work on their own as well. And it is just a delight, although maybe don't listen to it if you're feeling particularly sad or depressed, because it is a pretty sad group of songs, I would say. Anyway, this is just a great album, and even though it was a recent discovery for me, I just had to have it on this list. So it's time for my final pick, my 10th choice of my favourite albums from the 1980s. And I really struggled on which album to choose for this, but in the end I have gone with Tug of War by Paul McCartney. Now, I absolutely love Paul McCartney. I love his solo career, I love Wings, I love the Beatles. I love that man so much, and Tug of War isn't my favourite of his albums, but it is still amazing. It's really consistent with some really strong vocals. All the songs are like extremely tuneful and melodic. Some of my favourites are Somebody Who Cares, Here Today and Wonderlust. But there isn't really a bad song on this album in my opinion. Here Today is an especially beautiful one because it is about Paul's relationship with John Lennon. I saw Paul play Here Today live about 6 years ago, and that was like one of the things that really drew me to this album. It was just a magical, beautiful experience, and it just strengthened my love for that song and for this album even more, so I just had to put it on this list. So there you have it, my top 10 albums from the 1980s. As always, please comment yours down below so that we can compare and have a chat. Obviously next I'll be doing the 1990s, so make sure you subscribe for that. And my next video is going to be my favourite progressive rock epic songs. So I will see you in a few days for that one. As always, thank you so much for watching. Comment your picks down below and I will see you very soon.